Hello, and welcome to the Pragmatic Live podcast series, where we tackle the biggest challenges facing today's product management, product marketing, and other market and data-driven professionals with some of the best minds in the industry. I'm Rebecca Kalogeris, Vice President of Marketing and Product Strategy at Pragmatic Institute, and your host for this episode. Today, I am very excited to have Oji Udezue, Chief Product Officer for Parsable, on with us. Hi, Oji. How are you doing?
I am doing fantastic, Rebecca. How are you?
Great. I'm really excited about this conversation. We're going to dig into lots of different fun topics. But before we do, if you can set some context for our listeners, tell us a little bit about your background and how you got into product.
Hi, everyone. It's good to talk to you. I got into products, I guess, a traditional way. I went to engineering school. Actually went to USC for my master's degree. And after I got out, I did a startup where I did some product management. And then I joined Microsoft and became a product manager on the Windows team, and eventually on some of the consumer apps teams at Microsoft. So that's really how I got started. Most of my formative learnings about being a product manager was at Microsoft. I've done a few things since then. At the end of my time at Microsoft, I joined a marketing team and helped lead a marketing team. I also have been a founder, which I did after I left Microsoft. And in the last few years, I've been part of some really amazing B2B SaaS startups or companies, Atlassian, Calendly, and also increase my skills to lead design teams as well. So that's sort of my journey so far.
It's a great journey, right? You've got lots of impressive companies that you've worked at, lots of different roles, which I think makes the best product people. I think it's really interesting too. You talked about B2B products, and some of which we all use all the time, like Calendly. There's not a person I know now that doesn't use that or its competition. And I think sometimes with B2B products too, people don't think of them quite as maybe innovative or as sexy as some of the B2C products. But I think these days we see some really great innovations that come from that space. So what I wanted to dig in with you a little bit is, how do you create teams, right, that really enable innovative, creative solutions? How do we set up an environment that allows people to not only know, hey, these are the problems we should solve, but here are the solutions that are the right approach, the part that's going to delight the user? And I know you've got a lot of experience with that. So if you can talk a little bit about your philosophies there, that would be great.
Thanks for the question, Rebecca. So before I jump into creating teams and sort of how to think about creative teams, at least how I think about creative teams, is just touch on the B2B thing. You know, I was lucky to join Atlassian in 2016, and they are the original OG of product-led growth. This, at least very early, little Australian company that sold its software over the internet, and it was all on the web, and they didn't do a lot of traditional marketing. Atlassian's business model taught me a lot about building a software business more efficiently. I think about that as the stuff we call product-led growth. I also really believe that all software businesses are ultimately going to sort of adopt all the techniques of B2C software, because I think that's what it means to be customer-centric, and saying that all of us are just consumers. So anyway, I just wanted to say that because that's a lot of what I try to teach and the stuff I've learned. Well, how do you create a culture or a team that fosters innovative ideas? So I thought about this question, and the first thing I think is clarity, right? The thing that is hard sometimes is just, clearness. Like what do you focus on and what don't you focus on? And I try to achieve the biggest goals of the company. Now, the stage of the company matters a lot in how well and deeply this can be stated. If you are a very mature company, then your choices explode and the need for focus and clarity is even more. Early stage companies have notions, ideas for repeatable business, But strategy is really about customer listening and validation feedback loops. But generally, their choices are fewer. And so stating it can be easier to do. So I think that's the first thing. If you don't provide clarity, then people sort of run around with good ideas, which you're not sure will connect with customers or will produce the business results you want. I think the second thing is customer listening and signals. And I don't mean like just listen to customers. I mean like as a culture, you have to make it easy for everyone to, or for R&D teams, not just product managers, to come into contact with the kind of customers you want, ask high quality questions and arrive at good synthesis, right? You can do this through calls, regular calls, put feedback in the application so it just flows in, et cetera, et cetera. But again, it's not about just like those things, about making it easy for everyone to do. If everyone has to jump through 5 hoops to talk to a customer in your business, it's going to be very difficult to create a culture that uses customer signals to create innovative ideas. You also have to create a good system for hiring great people. Great people are a prerequisite for the culture that sort of hums with creativity. And you have to create a system for managing them well, incentivizing them and keeping them happy. And finally, one of the things I'm obsessed about is sometimes people load up a team with smart people and they don't use them, either because of hierarchy, like only the most senior people will think of, creative ideas and everyone else executing them. And so I call the focus on giving people a lot more access to important ideas so they can shape it, critique it, remix it, is this idea of flat spaces or open spaces in a company. And so I try really hard to create those spaces so I can harness the intelligence of the entire organization where I can.
Lots of good points there. If we can just hit a couple of those again. So I think the clarity and the focus, when we talk about in our annual survey, we always ask the question, like, if you could ask your CEO one thing or tell your CEO one thing without getting in trouble, what would it be? And the number one answer is always focus. And I think your point that it is often more difficult to focus in larger organizations because you have so many different opportunities is so powerful. So what are some ways in terms of clarity and focus that you not only kind of keep, well, let's start with how do you keep yourself on track? Sometimes I think at the executive level, we are the ones who tend to spread the fastest. So how do you keep yourself in check and really focused?
That's a good question. I have to think about that. So, well, I think, every time I think about product management, I turn to some reliable and repeatable frameworks. One framework I think is just the North Star framework. Like if you Google around, you see PMs and software executives obsessed about North Stars. So I think it's important to pick a North Star. And the reason it's important is that, the North Star framework requires picking one thing, right? And that's focus, right? That's focusing. And then the framework will tell you a little bit about making sure it's a leading indicator, right? That sort of leads the rest of the important metrics that you have. So you have to be kind of careful when you pick it. So I think that one way is just follow that North Star metric. It's incredibly clarifying for everyone in the organization. The other thing is, I'm going to say something that seems obvious, but a clear vision and mission, right, is important. If you have clear principles, like, of how to be or how to innovate, and this is our principles for innovation, for example, you can articulate that with some brevity. That's what you do. Also, who are your customers? You're not solving for everybody. Solving for everybody is basically solving for nobody. How do you articulate who your customers are and who your customers are not? I'm very fond of this VMSO framework that we used at Atlassian. I try to use it everywhere now, which is your vision, your mission, your strategies, which are sort of your levers of growth, and your objectives, which are really clear goals and metrics. And to that, I usually add like who's the customer, who's the buyer, and what are the priorities. And I think that just forcing myself to create these artifacts, the North Star, VMSO, helps keep me focused.
Yeah, and I think in that all of those items are also going to help your team stay focused, right? Because they also give them touch points and sort of North Stars to focus on.
In fact, if you have a large organization, it's useful to get different groups within your organization to author their own, not author a North Star, for example, because that's for everybody. But what is your mission within the company that's tied to the company's mission? What are your own strategies, and what are your own projects that will, make those strategies true? And so if you ask people to the mid-level of the organization to really articulate those things, you get some consistency.
You also mentioned the idea of sort of giving open spaces, right? Within your team and within your company, open spaces for creative ideas. Can we talk a little bit more about what you mean there and how you do that?
Yeah, I've written about this on Medium about product culture. And so I hope people who are listening would check it out, because it's much more in depth. But, one of the things that frustrated me as an ICPM was the fact that I didn't always get a seat at the table when we were talking about the most important choices on what to build. And I'm speaking about my Microsoft era. Now, that changed over time. I think I was specifically given access to those things earlier than most when I was at Microsoft, because I think I had a gift for, clear communication. I had a gift for thinking about where we want to be in the future. So I got a seat at the table earlier than most, but it still took some time. And I always think about that and think about, well, who in my organization is feeling that way? And what do they know that I'm missing? Most of us, in product management software, there's a lot of brilliant people. And the question really for an organization is, how do you harness that? Like, if you do a thought experiment, assuming that no one knows the perfect thing and that it takes collaborative filtering and critique to get to the best ideas, how do you do that faster with the people in your organization? So that's sort of my where I arrive at open spaces. And how I do this specifically, and I can't say that I'm perfect at it or maybe even good at it, is I try to find choke points where some of the most critical ideas we want to execute on are being discussed, or we want to make decisions on them. And then I try to make those places inclusive, as inclusive as possible, meaning that it's not about necessarily hierarchy or title, but it's about believability, and it's about broadening those spaces as much as possible. So in most organizations I'm in, I have this ritual I call product trust, where we discuss the why of what we're doing and trying to build. And those places I try to make inclusive, right? So there's various people of various hierarchies and titles in those meetings. And I think that, and encouraging them to sort of speak up, to examine the idea that every voice counts, that is one way that I try to implement flat spaces and open spaces within an organization.
So you talked there a lot too about sort of cross-functional collaboration and making sure there was maybe a larger table, a big round table with lots of people there. How much of that do you think is influenced by the fact that you, as you mentioned in your history, you've kind of come from an engineering background, you've worked with design, you've worked with marketing, or is that, how much is influenced by that, or how much is it just who you are?
That's a really good question. I think it's more about who I am than about the multidisciplinary parts of my career. Like I said, it's really like, what am I missing? Like, what ideas don't I have? There are lots of anecdotes about, like at Netflix, they call it mining for dissent, right?
Mm.
The Netflix CEO talks a lot about how he bungled uh, the splitting of their DVD business from their streaming business. For it happened like for a month, and they reversed it. And his book talks about how he just said that's what they're going to do, and a lot of people didn't believe in it, but they were too afraid to tell him that it was a dumb idea, and they executed on it, and they saw a lot of lost value as a result. So I'm always afraid of that. Like, why should I do something dumb when someone in the organization knows it's dumb? They should be able to speak up. So I think it's really rooted in who I am and what I've learned and sort of the pattern recognition around the world. There are also examples, like when I was at Bridgewater, they used to have these management meetings with the person who led the company, Ray Dalio, who was like very accomplished, one of the richest men in the world. But these management meetings could be observed by someone like me. I could just walk in. Now, I didn't really have a voice, but at least I could see, and it was transparent. And so I started to obsess about what does it mean to do that, and to do that in a very egalitarian way. And this is not a social experiment or anything like that. The fact is, there is believable smarts you need to harness. Now, the cross-disciplinary part comes from the fact that product management doesn't get to decide everything. Like, I don't even think, when I think about R&D teams, I think about a shipyard. I have this metaphor of a shipyard, which is thousands of people working in concert to make an economy or part of an economy work and trade work. And so it's design, it's engineering, it's product, it's product marketing, it's customer success, it's customer support. So I think orchestrating harmony and clarity between those groups turns out like really well-running organizations who can build great products. So they have to be at the table, and period, if you want to do that well.
There's so many good lessons there, Oji. I think one of the things that people think product managers are a lot of type A personalities, right? And I think a lot of them on the way up feel like they are going to succeed by just like holding all the control as close as possible, right? And kind of proving that they know the way. But the strength that comes from either the confidence in that you can be wrong, and the confidence to ask if you are wrong and really listen, is, I think, a powerful lesson in finding the best solutions overall, but also building the type of teams and environments and relationships that allow you to get the most success. Because, as you said, product can't do anything alone, right? And we can think we're the smartest people in the room, but there is no product without, and there's nobody who knows about the product without everyone else in that spot.
Yeah, I think it's a misconception of the job. And frankly, I fell for it. Like, at Microsoft, being a product manager was the most coveted job there was, because I could make a change to Windows and affect 1 billion people. But my job isn't to bring forth my best ideas to the world, as interesting and as alluring as that is. The job is really to ensure that the best ideas, the best customer-focused ideas ship. And so as long as we are looking at all innovation that happens in R&D as with an eye of the best making it out to customers, then that's really the right conception of the job.
Yeah, and you brought the customer piece back in, and that was the middle sort of stool leg you talked about. How do you, in sort of the open space environment where we're trying to make sure we're really hearing from everyone internally, how does product make sure that also reflects the market? How do we not only listen to the customers, but how do we bring it effectively to the organization so that's grounding in those discussions and the efforts?
Yeah, there's something that I've been thinking about and will probably write about soon. And I think that's the idea that there's been a couple of eras in the software business. I think that the first era was the era of, think about it as hobbyists, right? Super early, Microsoft was formed, Oracle, we started to solve the basic problems of software, operating systems, databases, etc., and not making a ton of money. And I think that the second phase, which we went into really fast and probably been last 25 years or 25 years after that first phase, is utility. We started to sell this software to companies, to CIOs, and they paid us a lot of money for it, and we created a lot of billionaires, right? Because they needed these tools as a whole new industry. But I think that we're in the era of convenience. Software has become just infrastructure. It just has to work. It's really software for people, not people for software. In the era before this one, feature lists were all that mattered because it was an arms race. You had to buy the most features because everything will become obsolete, and you always are focused on that. In this era, it's about how does this fit the lifestyle of the B2B customer, of the consumer? How does it make the quality of their life better? I think about Uber. Uber just sort of closed down and simplified the workflow of hailing a cab, which we've been doing for a century. And so that's what I mean by the era of convenience. Now, if you view the world in this way, then a lot of good ideas come from customers, right? A lot of good ideas come from inhabiting the space and the pain of customers. And I think that's the right culture to build, tied to some of my previous comments. People come out of school or various parts of their career trying to change the world with their ideas. And we glorify inventors a lot. And trust me, I'm super creative. I think about amazing things to do all the time. But it takes a mind shift to understand that innovation is best done in concert with the customer, understanding their unspoken needs, seeing into the better future of their less painful workflows. And if you sort of think about it that way, that your invention always has someone else at the table, and you kind of think about that and you make that part of how you think about your approach to problems, then you're going to see a much more innovative culture, inside a company. Also, celebrate your customers' wins, their testimonials, their joy, their success. Celebrate that internally. When your team sees you celebrating customer wins, it helps them be more customer-centric, and it helps and sort of creates better ideas that are customer-centric for them. You also sort of have to work on the basics, encouragement, growth, mastery, autonomy. Obsess how to give your employees that, and their spark of creativity will stay alive.
I love the idea of celebrating customer wins. It just really brings home to the fact that you're aligned towards the same goals. And I've also found as we've gone virtual and as I've talked to customers and partners and they're all virtual, that the celebrations are one of the things that maybe haven't translated into this environment as well. And so figuring out how we carry those forward, particularly customer ones, right? That's why we're doing this. Their success is our success, and making that really clear, I think is very powerful.
I totally agree.
All right, Oji, this has been amazing. And we've talked a lot of different things about innovation and culture and the type of culture that creates it. If you could have our listeners do two things differently today or two things differently tomorrow based on what we talked about today, what would that be? Where would you have them focus?
Two things. Oh, gosh. That's like a whole universe of possible responses. Look, I would say build something, try to build something. Builders change the world. So try to leave a mark by building. A lot of people have said this, but probably the most famous people that I know are Steve Jobs and Mark Andreessen, which most people here, listening will understand. As a PM, really try to understand the customer first. It's not that you shouldn't have great ideas, you should, but when customer understanding is part of your ideation, you'll become more successful, trust me. It'll help with everything else you do, and it'll give you conviction. Keep learning, get better at learning, teach if you can. The more you teach, the deeper you know things. It's almost like everything you know can be known deeper. And the question for us all the time is, how deep should we go? Are you all on the surface all the time, mid-level, or really, really deep? So I think if you teach, you go deeper faster because people ask hard questions and you have to sort of get to know them. So those are the three things I'd say.
Oh, great answer. Great answer. All right, Oji, this has been a genuine pleasure. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. I appreciate your time too. And thank you for the opportunity.
Absolutely. All right, everybody. That does it for today's episode. Thank you, everyone, for listening. And don't forget to join us next week when we tackle another great topic designed to help you elevate your product, your company, and your career.